Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 2023 meeting of the Powys County Council Governance and Audit Committee. And we have some guests with us. We've got Councillor Audit and Councillor James, I think, in attendance, and we're both very welcome. Some of our own members have got double bookings today, so they will be in and out a little bit, but we are quorate, so we can continue with the meeting. So welcome everyone, and Connor, if you could record apologies and the times when colleagues move in and out of this meeting, I'd be very grateful. Before we start the meeting proper, please could any members identify any disclosures of interest that they may have relating to the agenda today. I'll take no hands showing as an indication that there are no disclosures of interest in connection with the agenda today. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of our meetings held on the 23rd of June and the 28th of July. Turning the pages slowly, I will ask from members any points of correction, clarification or matters arising from the agenda as we turn the pages. So firstly, the minutes from the 23rd of June 2023. I'll use the page numbers of the agenda pack. So anything on page 6, correction, clarification, matters arising. Page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 and 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 4, 5. They are very long and comprehensive minutes, so I think we should also thank the Secretariat team for the minute. Turning to page 32, 33, 4. Any points on, before I move, any points on the agenda items from the 23rd of June, on the minutes from the 23rd of June? No, I'll move on. Move on to our meeting, the minutes from the 28th of July 2023. Turning the pages, again asking for points of correction, clarification or matters arising. Turning the pages, I'm on page 40, 41, 42, 3, 44, 45, 46, 47 and 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 3, 4, 5, and on to page 60. Asking members just to call out. Okay, are there any points? Councillor Pete, you've raised your hand on the minute from July.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I didn't realise about call out until you said I missed my number. It was just a quick one on page 45. There were just 3 points outstanding from the technology assurance framework review. I just wanted to check that they will be picked up under item 14 on this agenda, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peat. My understanding is that Diane, who will be with us to give us a presentation under the agenda item 14, my understanding is that those matters arising, your matters arising and the action points will be picked up under that agenda item. So on that basis, are you content to wait till agenda item 14 and raise your issues then, please?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other points on the minutes from the 23rd or 23rd of June and 28th of July? Okay, on that basis of silence, we'll take these as a correct record of our meetings before the summer break. I'll move us on to agenda item 4 and welcome Bethan from Audit Wales. And we have the draft wellbeing objectives examination report. And so I'll hand over to Bethan, and I understand that Emma will be responding to this report on behalf of the council, and this report is being provided to us for information and assurance largely. Beth.
Okay, thank you, Bore da Bob. Good morning. I'd just like to clarify that sort of the draft report now, this has been issued as final, so just to be clear on that. The wellbeing objective setting work is a part of an ongoing rolling programme that the Auditor General undertakes to assess the extent in which public bodies have acted in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle when setting their wellbeing objectives. And this report sets out the findings from our review of Powys County Council and its approach that it's taken, and to what extent has it acted in accordance with the SD principle. You'll see in the appendix of the report positive indicators, so that sort of gives you a flavour of the sort of things we were looking at as part of that review. The content of the report has been agreed with the Council in terms of factual accuracy already, and the focus today really should be on how the Council is responding to recommendation and what action is it taking for the next iteration of the settings, or just to inform future work as well. I take it that members have read the report, so I won't go through it line by line, but I'll highlight some of the points for your consideration. So the overall findings, you'll be able to see that on page 6 of the report, and that's found that the review of the Council's approach to setting its wellbeing objectives has applied the Sustainable Development Principle, but should draw on more diverse citizen views and fully embed its monitoring arrangements. I'll just summarise a few of the positive points in the reports for you. The Council has drawn on an extensive set of evidence and data to inform its wellbeing objectives, and also captures data on the long-term trends as well. There are a few examples of engagement with members, officers and citizens through workshops and surveys, and the Council has a clear understanding of how its wellbeing objectives supports long-term national goals, the objectives of other public bodies as well, like the PSB, for example. And it's also considered preventative approaches while designing the wellbeing objectives. The report also provides commentary of opportunities where the Council can build on the progress it's already made in applying the SDP. And those are set out in the recommendations on page 10 of the report. So those are around drawing the views of a full diversity of the population, ensuring that the MTFP reflects the resources and how it will be prioritised, and embedding the new performance management framework and quality framework to sort of enable effective monitoring of the wellbeing objectives. So overall, I'd say there was quite a lot of positives in that report, and it's about building on what's already been done and put in place, and strengthening arrangements for future iterations. I think that's all I'd like to say, Chair, on that at the moment. I don't know if you mentioned that officers would like to come in on that.
Thanks very much, Beth, and thank you very much, and thanks for drawing out the positives, because there are a range of really positive remarks in the report, and I think that's worth putting on the record. Emma.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Beth. And at this point, which is very unhelpful, my computer has chosen to freeze, so I can't refer to the documentation that I was hoping to utilise during this session. There were just a couple of additional points that I wanted to draw to your attention within the report before responding to the actions that we've taken forward in respect of the content. One was around there's also a reflection upon delivery to be made via the integrated business plan process, transformation portfolio, and the medium-term financial strategy. So that was drawn out in terms of a positive. And also just to bring to the committee's attention that we revised our monitoring approach, hence why there was it as part of the recommendation in terms of allowing time for this to embed. So we moved to 3 measure categories of how much, how well, and what difference, and for all services to provide narrative and updates surrounding delivery against the wellbeing objective. We've had the first iteration of this in Q1, and the process already feels far more reflective, with all services understanding their role, which is presented in a publicly available scorecard. However, I do recognise that there was a challenge at Q1 in respect to scrutiny and scrutinising in a different way. The points that were made in respect of the specific recommendations, the engagement aspect, you'll be pleased to hear that as part of the work that we're doing across wider partners and the Public Service Board, under our objectives of one public service, we're trying to strengthen our broader engagement arrangements so that we engage well, but we do it once, so that there isn't fatigue, and that we utilise the resources that are available to us across our respective partners. In respect of the performance aspect and the embedding of that, as I said, we've done Q1. We're now in the process of Q2. And that, I think, what we'll see over the course of the year is that reporting will become better, and over time we'll be able to see whether we are heading in the right direction in respect to the actions we're taking, but more importantly the impact that we're expecting to see in line with the stronger, fairer, greener objectives. So I'm quite excited about that, because for the first time we're really pushing on what difference, and whilst I recognise that's quite challenging and it's difficult in any organisation, it's still the right thing to do, even if it's not perfect right now. It's the area that we should focus on. Otherwise we can be busy undertaking actions that may not have the impact in the desired areas that we require. And then the other aspect that came out in terms of the recommendation, of course, was in respect to the medium-term financial strategy and the alignment of resource. At the time of the audit, we hadn't aligned the resource, but we are in a position now where this year's budget set, we're working through next year's budget onwards. We've got the medium-term financial strategy for the 3-year period. We have aligned the transformation resource to the transformation portfolio, and we are reporting on that. So again, we'll see that strengthen as we embed those elements. So we really welcome the report. People were very engaged in terms of the workshops that Audit Wales held. We're really thankful and grateful for the feedback and the points, just to strengthen and be progressive even further, and just to give assurance to committee that we were taking those on board and fully implementing those, and looking forward to see what comes as a result of the work around this.
Thank you very much, Emma, for your response. Do committee members or any other colleagues who are with us today have any questions for Beth and or Emma, please? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll thank Bethan very much for her attendance and for the report, and thank Emma for responding as comprehensively as she did. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our corporate items, and our first corporate item is the fraud report, which Yvette is going to introduce. We receive quarterly reports. We are asked to raise any issues that we find in the report, and the purpose of us receiving this is to seek assurance on the authority's approach to fraud and fraud reporting, and to assure ourselves that the fraud team is delivering against any recommendations from Audit Wales or our internal auditor SWAP. So I'll hand over to Yvette, and Yvette, assume that members have read the report, but if you would briefly introduce your report and focus in on anything that you want from the committee today, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. You will have had the opportunity, as Chair has just explained, to look at the report. Just to summarise, our work continues with review work around domestic, so council tax, properties, reviews, exemptions. We're also extending that into the business rates field and the charitable sector. So that work is picking up pace with some good results. We continue our work with referrals that are sent in from other departments or from HR, or indeed the general public themselves, of which we're very thankful that people do take the time to report to us, and we can assure everybody that these are all thoroughly investigated to conclusion. The points that we needed to look at that were still outstanding, we had a concern about there being an absence of a reporting fraud button internally. Jane has now addressed that, and we hope for that to be put back in place soon, because that was something that was missing, that we did need to have. So that's good. The comments that had come back over the members' code of conduct, which we received from the Ombudsman, I've shared with you for a response there. And really the only other thing that I wanted to bring, because there's nothing startling over this last quarter, is that Powys have signed up again for International Fraud Awareness Week, which runs from the 12th to the 18th of November, and be very happy to receive any and all requests for specifics that would like to be included, either internally, or if the public would like to have a send out, that we could arrange something through comms for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvette. I'll open up for any questions from members. I can see Councillor Peate's got a question. Councillor Peate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Yvette, for a very good report there, and very pleased to hear as well that there's nothing startling in there, which is good news as well. I was just looking, I think it's on page 90, section 3.3, around the cases of employee fraud. And I don't know whether or not you could put a little bit of sort of context on that for me to help me with that. So I guess I was thinking in terms of like how many employees, what areas may that be in? Did we find that through our controls work, or did it come up through complaints? So I suppose it was just trying to, I know that might be difficult because they're in progress cases, but I didn't know if there was just a bit of context around that, please.
Okay, thank you. I can see Jane's immediately got her hand up, so I'm going to hand over to Jane to see if she would like to speak before myself.
Thanks, Yvette. I think, yeah, just to put some context in it, when you think of the number of employees that we have as a county council, between 4,000 and 5,000, when you include all school staff as well, 11 is not a significant number. However, I would point out that it's important that we do take a proactive action against any type of fraud. We do have a zero tolerance here in the council in terms of fraud, so it's important that we do investigate any allegations or suspicions that come forward. And I think it's worth pointing out, you know, of these 11 cases, we would work through it. I'm not prepared to give any detail for obvious reasons of those, but I just think it's important that everybody is aware that we do take it seriously and we do pursue anything that comes our way.
Thanks very much, Jane. Yvette, would you like to add anything to what Jane has said?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Chair. Yes, just really to say that, you know, when you see 11 cases listed under employee fraud, these are all allegations, accusations, and they come from all manner. So it might be from a colleague, it might be from an anonymous referral, it could be any sort of source, and we have to deal with these all in exactly the same way. So that's not to say that we have currently got 11 employees who we know have committed fraud. We are investigating that, and we investigate every single case in exactly the same way. It's all evidence-based, and it's right and proper that we do so, whether it's staff, contractors, or actually, you know, members of the public, and that's what's expected of us. Thank you.
Thank you for that assurance, Yvette, and thank you very much, Councillor Peake, for your question. Would you like to come in again?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to thank both Jane and Yvette there for the explanations and the reassurance that gives. So that does give me the context that I was seeking. So yeah, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peake, for your question. Are there any other questions? John, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm referring to section 6, and in particular the red RAG rated items. In particular, I'm the first one on page 92, I think, is virtually identical to a comment that was on the previous quarterly report. What progress are we making on that, Yvette, please?
Sorry, my numbering is different to yours. Would you be able to just explain
It's,
which one?
it's the first item under 6.1. And it's the first item in the table that's got a red status.
This is the one around the report fraud button, is it? Can I just
No,
confirm?
it's the staff who sign in via or don't
Right.
sign in via net
Okay,
consent.
yes. Okay, thank you. Apologies. I am still working with Julie in ICT to try and establish whether this is a factual number, because I'm assured that from the research they're doing, and it's the business team, you know, who are looking at whether they are current employees, ex-employees, whether they were temporary people. So at the moment, I'm hearing that it is actually a far less number than has actually been reported previously, but they are still working on that, which is taking some considerable time, because there are a number of people who obviously aren't on our logins from that point of view. So it's whether they then come in and use a standalone system or a spare laptop or something to be able to do so. But I am still working with ICT to try and get a definitive resolution to that. Is
the end in sight there, Yvette?
I'd like to say yes, but I have to be honest and say I really don't know, but I'm not going to let it go, neither will ICT. So we will pursue this until we have the result that we need.
Thank you. You've already discussed the fraud button. I'm going on now to the question of codes of conduct. There, it's rather left open-ended now. We apparently can't change our the terms. So where do we go from here? Suggestion.
I mean, essentially, you can see what the response is, that councils do have an opportunity to add to it before they accept it. But then, you know, the contra information there was that the ombudsman wouldn't normally investigate anything that's not set out. So even if we chose to add something to it, then they're saying that they wouldn't investigate anyway. So it's quite difficult from that perspective, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I mean. We said that it wouldn't be sufficient for Clive to send out an email, but perhaps that's going to be the only way. I don't know what other people feel.
That was my conclusion, John. I mean, ideally, we could have had the ombudsman guidance route, but I think in the absence of that being a feasible option, I think we probably do need to ask Clive to send the email that was previously proposed.
Yeah. And try to get something put in at the next review.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Yvette. I'm looking across. Are there any other questions or points that colleagues would like to make on this agenda item? No. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll thank Yvette for her determination and her paper, and for the work that she does and for her attendance today. Thanks very much, Yvette. I'll move us on to the corporate safeguarding agenda item 6, the corporate safeguarding board activity update, and this is really for us to note the progress that the council is making against the action plan and the commitments made, and Nina is going to introduce this report and give us an update. Nina.
Diolch, bore da. Good morning, everybody. The Corporate Safeguarding Board update that I'm going to be presenting to you this morning is from the 8th of June 2023, and the report summarises the information and discussions held at that meeting. I appreciate that is a number of months ago now, so some of the information and some of the work has continued and progressed since that date, but nevertheless, it's important that we're here to discuss it. First item on the agenda was review of progress against the actions on the Safeguarding Regulatory Tracker. 4 actions on the tracker with a completion date that had passed were reviewed and discussed. The board noted that the action requiring the publication of lead officer and lead member for safeguarding roles and responsibilities had been completed, so this action could be closed. The action requiring the volunteer safer recruitment policy was completed pending a few minor amendments, and it was agreed that once those amendments were made and completed, it would be circulated to the board and the action closed. And that has happened as well. Actions relating to the gathering of contractual monitoring information from services regarding their monitoring and addressing of safeguarding issues. And there was an action around clarification of powers expectations of contracts regarding safeguarding training had taken longer than expected. So this was discussed at board, and a deadline for those actions was reframed to the end of August. Feedback from Cabinet, Health and Care Scrutiny and yourselves, Governance and Audit Committee, is a mandatory agenda item on every single of the board meetings. So the board in the June meeting discussed and noted there was no comments from the Cabinet. There was a number of comments discussed from Health and Care Scrutiny around elective home education. And they requested an update on that at a future meeting, which has happened and been completed. That contracts and procurement lead attended a future scrutiny as well to update on changes in contract management. This has also been completed, and I note as well that you have the relevant officer attending for your next agenda item here this morning as well. Scrutiny discussed safer internet usage and asked whether that could be considered to be a safeguarding theme of the month. And that other methods of communication should be used to include and to promote that information, including schools, town and community councils, leisure centres, county councillors, and this was agreed. I can just update committee this morning to say that we are about to go live with our spotlight on safeguarding updates. So please look out in the next few days for those updates to start arriving. Statistics about mandatory safeguarding training was discussed with scrutiny as well, and they asked that we look to include whether school staff and volunteers could be included within the information provided, and it was agreed at board that officers would take that away and look into that. Scrutiny asked what timeframe was set for staff to complete mandatory training, and they were given the response. The board were advised that there is a 2-week deadline which is given for new staff to complete. Scrutiny also asked about how staff without access to computers access mandatory training, and the Organisational Development Professional Lead gave a briefing to this, Board were informed that hard copies have been provided successfully to staff, and additionally training is delivered in different times of the day to suit work patterns. Both have had very positive outcomes, and I'd really like to bring to your attention the following statistics. So cleaning and catering and highways, transport and recycling, obviously 2 areas with large numbers of staff, large numbers of frontline staff as well, without access to ICT. On the 1st of January this year, cleaning and catering had 44.7% compliance with mandatory training. As of the 1st of June, that was up to 85.8%. Highways, transport and recycling moved from 67.8% to 96.6% by June. So I think it's really just a note there of how working differently with the compliance to mandatory training has really delivered. So really positive to note there. Scrutiny requested that the Safeguarding Action Plan be included within future activity reports, and this was agreed. We have included the link to the quarterly report within this update, but we have had feedback since that some people have had trouble accessing that link. So I will look into future activity reports to do a PDF version so people can access that easier. So I will take that as an action away as well. And just to note, the lining of meetings didn't quite work. So the feedback from yourselves was actually fed back to the September meeting, just how the meetings fell at that time. We had an update from SWAP. We were provided with audit report and appendices, and an officer attended the meeting and gave an update. Confirmed the DBS team gave a high assurance, but there were some areas given a more limited assurance, and those areas were noted as taxis, foster carers, procurement, with improvements needed. The heads of service for those 3 areas spoke at the board, confirmed that remedial actions had been identified, agreed, and were already in the process of being implemented. The board also noted and requested that the actions from the DBS audit will be incorporated into the regulatory tracker to ensure that we monitor progress against those. We discussed the safeguarding audits self-assessment work that was undertaken. All services across the council undertake a self-assessment evaluation, and we included a section for the first time this year on safeguarding. We discussed and noted that heads of service had completed the template differently, and not all questions were relevant for all service areas. Heads of service were asked to create an action plan for themselves and their service areas in terms of safeguarding, and there was a lot of actions and communication and reminders from that. So we agreed as a board that we will be looking to review the questions of that safeguarding or self-assessment work moving forward, taking into account, how the heads of service had completed it a bit differently and the relevance of it. So absolutely reviewing the questions moving forward, and that will be discussed at a future meeting. And we'll also be tracking progress with the actions as well at future meetings as well. Preparations for the National Safeguarding Week are well underway. It's in November, and Powys are hosting the National Safeguarding Conference on the 16th of November, with the theme being safeguarding in rural communications. So a lot of work happening to make sure that we're making the most of that opportunity, with communications linking with safeguarding leads around promotion and communication of that event as well. Annual private fostering report. We had a report and an update on private fostering arrangements that fall within childcare legislation. So this applies to any child under the age of 16 who moves into another household outside of their immediate family. So it could be a friend of the family, for example, for longer than 28 days. So the board were informed that the local authority has statutory duties to assess, undertake DBS checks and visit to ensure the child is safe and needs are being met. The board had lots of questions on this, and we were informed that there have only been 2 private fostering arrangement notifications in the last 12 months, with 2 arrangements in place at the time of the board meeting. Awareness raising was really key, and board noted that this should be to promote a sense of support and good outcomes, rather than being seen as any kind of statutory intrusion. So guidance support is available for social workers, and the report and an update was agreed and requested to be sent to all councillors to raise awareness on this subject, and that has been completed. The board then went through a number of our mandatory reports by exception on young people's housing, a real big discussion on young people who are homeless and the challenges and the use of bed and breakfast accommodation. And the board noted and were updated on a number of housing development business cases that were being progressed, looking to broaden the scope of housing options that might assist in that moving forward. Elective home education board were updated about the Welsh Government guidance, which had just been received, and that would be officers and departments were working on that at that time. Mandatory safeguarding training is a mandatory, obviously we discuss that at every board meeting, it's really important. The board were informed that all service areas have increased their compliance with both safeguarding and VAUDA SV mandatory training, which is really positive to note. Board discussed and noted that children's services showed a slightly lower compliance at 82%. The service had discussions over whether the corporate safeguarding training was relevant for their area, given that officers are trained to a high level in safeguarding. However, after review, they have determined that children's services staff should continue to complete the mandatory training, as it covers all the basics, and of course it covers adult safeguarding as well. So, and the head of service gave assurance that compliance is being addressed through supervision sessions. It was also noted our VAUDA ASFI Ask and Act training, we've got 91% compliance rate, which compares extremely favourably with other local authorities. We have received a report on adult social care safeguarding. The board noted that the appointeeship and deputyship unit had received a positive outcome report following inspection by the Office of the Public Guardian. Children's safeguarding service, safeguarding performance was also discussed. The board challenged and looked at, noted that there had been some dips in some areas of performance. However, the trajectory was showing overall improvement. Numbers of children on child protection register were low, around 100, in contrast to 12 months period. So just to give you a flavour of the conversations and the challenge, the board were looking at that data. Future agenda items have been noted within there for your information, and we had some items of other business as well. Home Office Anti-Terrorism, the board were informed that Property Planning and Public Protection Service had received correspondence regarding anti-terrorism information processes. In particular, this relates to notifications about individuals who may or do post a threat to people in Powys. So the signing and return of a memorandum of communication identifying a prevent lead would allow the Home Office to send us those notifications. And the board agreed that the prevent lead would be a senior manager in the public protection team, and notifications would go to them. The board were also informed that the safeguarding fora, which are a multi-agency learning development sessions, have now resumed post-COVID, with the first one held with 75 delegates, which was really successful. And the aim is to run two sessions of that a year. Future meetings are scheduled there for your information but I'll finish there, and thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to come and talk through the report briefly for you. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Nina, very much appreciated. Are there any questions for Nina, please? If there are, just the usual show your hand. Whilst colleagues are mulling, Nina, I've got a question, which is it's about the DBS checks, and I guess what prompted my question is the juxtaposition in the report of 2.7, the annual private fostering report paragraphs, and then the reports by exception, the young people's housing, 16 and 17-year-olds. And I just wondered if there was any discussion or if there's any procedure around, albeit it's post-16, around DBS checks and requirements for accommodation where homeless 16 and 17-year-olds are placed, you know, because it still is protection of vulnerable adults. And I just wondered if there was any kind of DBS requirement for that.
Thank you. It's a really good question. Could I take that as a way as an action to report back on you? Because I just like to double check, because you've got a number of services working together there, isn't there? You've got children's services and housing, etc. So I just want to go back and check and bring the answer back to you, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely, take it away as an action. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Are there any other questions for Nina? If not, we'll thank you for your report, Nina, and look forward to your next update report and the answer to my curiosity around POVA DBS for homeless and the kind of settings that people are placed in. So thank you very much. Thanks very much. Moving on, therefore, to agenda item 7. Which is a commercial update, and we're going to receive a presentation from Wayne to give us assurance, or hopefully to give us assurance, Wayne, on the approaches that the authority has in the commercial and procurement space. So over to you, Wayne.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just check that people can see that first slide?
No.
No.
Oh, right. Okay.
No.
Sorry.
I think it's coming, Wayne. Yep, we've got it.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you, Chair. I actually, in presenting, I'm then losing people's. The face of the people and any hands up, etc. So if anybody wants to raise a question, then please do so and please shout out. Just to what I wanted to do today, I was invited to come and present provide an update on the commercial activity happening across the organisation. My name is Wayne Miles. I'm the professional lead for procurement commercial. I joined the organisation in September last year. So what I'm aiming to do is actually provide an update of some of the mechanisms we got in place, some of the improvements we put in place, and the progress we're making. In terms of background, the spend for the organisation. So we spent last year £252 million on a range of goods, services, and works. That was with 6,800 suppliers. But if we sort of hone in on some sort of key critical areas, the top 17 suppliers that we used actually had an individual expenditure of in excess of 2 million, and that represented 25% of our total expenditure. If we look at the sort of the level below, actually that any supplier above 1 million per annum spend, including the ones above, the 17 above for the 2 million, there are 57 suppliers there. And then if any supplier in excess of £250,000, then we had 203 suppliers there, and that represented 73% of our total spend. Why am I sharing this? It's really about sort of highlighting where our critical suppliers are and the ones that actually we should be focused on our resource to make sure actually we're managing risk, we're achieving benefits realization, and really making sure that those organisations are working in partnership with the council to meet its obligations and meet its service aims. The council's traditionally its activity when it comes to procurement has very much been centred on tender management. So the re-award of contracts. What we had limited focus on was actually about pre-procurement strategy development. So looking at the different options to meet our commercial needs and actually identifying what the best option is on that, and then also putting in place robust contract management mechanisms to actually make sure that actually we are we're achieving service delivery, service objectives. We're identifying and managing supply chain risks, And we're looking at mechanisms to actually increase benefits of realisation. So not just in terms of the service delivery and the cashable aims, but also about wider objectives around social value, etc. So in terms of our approach, what we've done is actually we've got sort of 4 key pillars of activity, which enables us to put in place the appropriate controls and mechanisms to achieve our core objectives. So the first one, from a governance point of view, we have contract procedure rules in place. So that forms part of the constitution. It sets out the procedures in which all individuals across the organisation should undertake their procurement process. In addition to that, what we have introduced now is also a commercial performance and risk board, and that brings together a number of senior officers across the council to have visibility and oversight, and agree mechanisms to actually to put in place increased controls and measures to improve performance. Sort of underlying sort of building blocks to achieve that are under further three core areas. So systems and processes. So we use national systems via Welsh Government to manage, advertise and manage our tenders. We have just recently, or in the process of rolling out, a new contract management framework, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but that gives us a consistent approach across the organisation, applying a tiering mechanism based on value and risk to identify our core contracts and making sure we're managing those really effectively and robustly. We have a new contract financial risk management regime that we've put in place, and then again I'll talk about that in the following slide. And then of course we have a commercial risk register in place, so a mechanism in place to identify and manage risk across the board. Excuse me. To support that, information intelligence is key. So there's a number of strands that that support our work. So one is actually, we are now a member of the WLGA Market Expert Intelligence Group. So that group brings together professionals from across the public sector who are scanning our supply chains, identifying risks, and then have a collective approach in terms of how we manage some of those supply chain risks. Clearly, there has been significant issues in the supply chain. The Ukraine conflict, Brexit, the COVID, etc., have all impacted on supply chains, and we see those in our everyday life in terms of food prices and things like that. But that has far wider sort of implications across our complete supply chain. We have in place a procurement pipeline and contract register, so we have visibility of what's coming down for our future demand, and actually making sure we're putting in place mechanisms to identify the best commercial strategy to achieve those objectives. And then what we've also done is actually created recently a green network. So we're bringing together with a clear focus in terms of the net zero ambitions we have, bringing together people from across the council with a real strength and desire to do the right thing. So actually we're building our sort of, it's becoming part of the DNA of our organisation to have that knowledge and that skill sets, and actually how we can embed far greater aims in terms of achieving our net zero objectives. And then finally, in terms of making sure we've got the right skills in place. So we've introduced a new contract management training regime. So that's, again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've also held a number of workshops. So we held a workshop a few weeks ago in relation to the forthcoming procurement regulations, which are going to come into force next year. So making sure we're preparing for that. And there are also other sort of wider commercial requirements actually that we need to be considering in our commercial activity. So the new Subsidy Control Act is one of those. And again, we had a collective workshop in place to make sure that people have that awareness and the skills in place to be managing what can be quite complex areas. If I then move on in terms of contract management, so improving our contract management approach has been a key sort of feature for us. What we put in place is a new contract financial risk management regime. So we've done this in a number of phases. We started with those suppliers which were the highest, and we used a credit risk report from an organisation called Dun & Bradstreet, and they identified organisations for which sit within 4 levels of risk. So level 1 is actually a minimum level of risk. Risk 2 is actually lower than average. Risk 3, slightly greater than average. And then risk 4, which is a significant level of risk. And what we've been doing is actually working with service areas, identifying those suppliers that are actually a risk level 3 or risk level 4, and making sure we've got mechanisms in place to mitigate those risks. Now, in some cases, I say that there is a need sometimes, or it's okay to use risky suppliers, and in some cases we have no alternative. But actually, what's not okay is not to know about those risks and not to have plans for managing them, and that's what we're doing. So what we're doing is actually identifying those risks. We're working with service areas and with the service areas to put in place mechanisms. In some cases, we have ceased working with those organisations. In others, we've been reassured by the changes and the controls they're putting in place to manage those risks. And that's what this mechanism is doing. So we've been removing those suppliers that are either in risk level 3 or risk level 4, either out of our supply chain or actually working with them to make sure that we are confident that actually they are managing those risks. In addition to contract management, we've been applied as a consistent approach to contract management across the organisation. There was undoubtedly pockets of really good things happening, but as an organisation, we weren't consistent with that. So what we've recently introduced is a contract management framework, and that's recently been approved by the Commercial Performance and Risk Board. This includes a tiering of the contracts portfolio based on value, risk, and complexity, and thus ensuring that actually we're dedicating our resources to those suppliers and those contracts which present the greatest risks for us. So making sure we've got those that real level of intensity and frequency in terms of managing those. In addition, that's supplemented and complemented with actually really good information intelligence. So I mentioned earlier about the councils being a member of the National Markets Experts Intelligence Group with the WIGA. So that's really providing a really good insight to and identifying commercial risks, and we're putting those mitigation plans in place where required. And then finally, in terms of skills, we've got 2 levels of training that we've been introducing. So first of all, any supplier for which actually we spend in excess of £1 million a year, we are putting in place a robust contract management training required for those contract managers working with those suppliers. So we've got 51 suppliers that sit in that within that scope. We have 31 contract managers that are managing those suppliers, and 16 of them have completed some national training that we utilise from the government commercial function, which is the UK government training programme, and we've been utilising that. We are then looking to, and the balance of those contract managers will be completing that training in the next few weeks. In addition, to complement that, and particularly for contracts which are of lower value, but nonetheless still need to make sure we are managing those robustly, we're introducing a new contract management awareness training, which is a bit of a lighter touch than the real detailed training, the 10 hours training that I've set out above. But that will make sure that across the organisation we've got individuals in place who have got the skills to robustly manage our contracts. If I then just sort of summarise, if I may, just a number of key takeaways. So what we've got in place, so we've introduced a new contract performance and risk board. So that provides that insight and that oversight of commercial activity across the organisation. So we are identifying risk, we're managing those risks, and actually monitoring performance as well. So, and there's lots of good things as well as happening. So I think it's important to state that. In addition, we've got the new contract management framework that's been introduced and a training program being rolled out in support of that. We're aware that actually there are new procurement regulations coming. So next year, currently projected for the autumn of 24, there will be new regulations, and therefore we will need to be changing our contract procedure rules, which form part of the Constitution, and a range of controls as well to meet the obligations set out in those regulations. But we're preparing for that. And then finally, in terms of 2 key areas of wider activity. So our net zero aims, we've established this community of the green network to make sure carbon reduction forms part of the DNA in terms of our commercial thinking, our commercial activities, and then also about engaging with local suppliers. So how do we actually we can't limit our commercial requirements to local suppliers, but what we can do is actually work with them to make sure that they are more successful going forward. And so we've got a number of engagements. In fact, next month we've got a number of we've got 2 events in relation, both one in the north, one in the south, in relation to construction organisations, and the aim of those local organisations being more successful in winning council contracts going forward. So that was all I had to say, Chair. So hopefully that was of benefit and interest, and welcome any questions that anybody would like to raise.
Well, thanks very much, Wayne. That was really helpful and very assuring presentation. So thanks very much, and I'm sure it will generate some questions. We already have a question from Gareth Hall, and then Councillor Peat. Gareth, you go ahead, and then I'll bring in Councillor Peat.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Wayne, for that very enlightening presentation. Just to pick up on your last point, you're taking an initiative for local suppliers to win council contracts. Are you extending this? How do you get local suppliers and local subcontractors to get into the supply chain of those major contractors? And not just subcontracting, but local materials, and also I've had experience in the past of them taking on local apprentices as well on like major construction projects.
Yeah, certainly. Can you hear me, Councillor?
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry. And yeah, certainly. So in terms of the, as I said earlier, we can't limit our opportunities to local organisations, but what we can do is actually about improving their awareness and improving their ability to build on that. The 2 examples that I said previously, that we're going to host a construction event in the north and one in the south. We're working with Business Wales on that. So Business Wales will be providing some additional support about how to tender for requirements. The opportunities in terms of with our prime contractors, we're actually building that as part of the mechanism for our tenders. So actually that forms part of the evaluation process. So actually setting out a percentage of the subcontractors that would be local, and that's forming part of that evaluation. I think the aim for us is actually, I think there are, like I say, there's pockets of really good things happening. I think the aim for us is to bring together that those examples and actually and sharing those examples, so actually we have a more consistent approach across the board to build on that. But certainly I think the local supplier element, that is being formed, that is being embedded as part of the requirements for prime contractors, and that does form part of the evaluation process. That actually, if they're saying a certain percentage of the supply chain, that accounts to the contract decision, contract award decision, and of course, contract management is a key feature to make sure they actually deliver on that promise. So we're putting in those mechanisms both at the front end to make sure actually they are identifying, given that opportunity, and then through the contract management process, making sure they're delivering on those objectives.
Thanks, Wayne. That's good to hear.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Sorry, thanks very much, Jane. Councillor Peat, I was on mute and I was asking you to come in.
No worries. I was trying to lip read, Lynn, but yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Wayne, for a thorough presentation there, and the sentiments that you've expressed therein. However, there is just one issue I'd like to raise, which I think is appropriate at this stage, and it relates to the Red Dragon site in Newtown, where there have been issues arising from the principal contractor going into administration that I would like to see addressed. I've been approached by subcontractors who are now thousands of pounds out of pocket, which primarily results from the principal contractor not setting up a project bank account as required by Powys County Council. The subcontractors were led to believe that the project bank account was in place, which, as I'm sure you know, is in effect their assurance that they would get paid, as it's a safeguard against the insolvency of the principal contractor. Any mitigation plans that Powys County Council had in place have failed for me, as these subcontractors are owed thousands, as I said. And they've now been told that it's they have to go and sort it out themselves with the administrators. There's many risks for me around this issue, such as what financial checks and monitoring were undertaken on the principal contractor to determine their financial viability. When a project bank account was a requirement, why wasn't it enforced and why wasn't it in place? Why didn't the mitigation plan, if any, work, especially when I believe in this instance the principal contractor was identified as representing a greater than average risk of business failure in December 2022. And the one that really worries me is in future, subcontractors may not engage in developments with us if we don't enforce these project bank accounts or have robust mitigation in place. So I think, as well as logging this as a risk, I would like to see an urgent review of the whole process and perhaps a thorough case study of the Red Dragon site. I think that case study could then be used to hopefully inform and complement the work that you were saying you're looking to do in setting out. As I say, there's a multitude of risk and questions arising from this, and it's far too many for me to list now that need to be addressed. And I suppose the final point is it shouldn't be, but perhaps Powys County Council will say it's too late to help these subcontractors in this case, unless there's any surplus money somewhere on the project. But for me, if we want to continue to encourage local contractors, which we really should be doing, I fully endorse that, we must really ensure we fully protect them and their livelihoods. And as I say, I'd like to see a review of this robustness of our processes carried out as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you,
Oh,
Councillor
sorry.
Pete, for raising that. No, not at all, Wayne. I was just going to ask you and Jane if either or both of you wanted to respond to Councillor Pete, please.
Certainly, if I may, and I'm not entirely sure the mechanism for the review, so I'll ask Jane if she could ask. But yeah, unfortunately, we had identified the risk of this organisation when we started this sort of review process in December. It was one of the ones in phase one. Sadly, there were a number of actions that we put in place, but sadly, they then went into administration in early February, I think it was. The mechanism sort of around project bank accounts, we're not alone in terms of experience issues in terms of trying to set these up. We are engaged with a number of other councils, other housing associations, etc., who are having problems with project bank accounts. Not least because actually there isn't any money in it for the banks, actually, and that's the one of the issues. But in this instance, the supplier was actually undertaking actions in order to put in the project bank account in place. Sadly, there were technical issues between the bank and the supplier, which meant actually it just didn't happen in time. So even though, but there's certainly lessons we need to take from that, and looking at mechanisms that actually we as an organisation, we do put these requirements in our contracts, and we've been successful in a number of those cases. That sadly, in this instance, it wasn't. It didn't get through to being finally in place, even though there were a number of steps that had been proceeding to achieve that. We've now sort of listed this as one of our sort of key risks, and looking to put in processes to address that and actually make sure how we monitor that requirement going forward. Unfortunately, that clearly doesn't help this example, because like I say, we identified them in December, and then sadly, sort of in the region of 6 weeks later, they actually did go into administration. We were at the very end of the project, and there was really some minor things in terms of for the project to complete, which we've now addressed separately, and no, it could have actually been that had the project completed just a matter of weeks before, then actually we may not have experienced this, and the supply chain may not have experienced these issues. It's I know it sadly doesn't help the sort of situation, but in terms of retrieval of monies, you know, there are clear mechanisms in place that needs to happen through the administration process, which the council, I'm afraid, the council is not part of that. We don't have a relationship with the administrator. It's the suppliers that have a relationship with the administrator. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, Jane, please.
Only really to say, I mean, of course, when anything such as this happens, we do review and see whether the council could have done more. And as Wayne has been quite clear, you know, we've changed our processes, particularly around the risk of suppliers. We do, as part of the tender process, review the financial position of companies. Unfortunately, very often that data can be a year or up to a year old, and things can quickly change. And I think particularly under the circumstances we've all seen over recent times, you know, costs have escalated since contracts have been tendered for and so on. So all of that no doubt will have contributed to what's happened in this case. So although we do have a number of actions we can put in place, they're not necessarily going to identify things that happen then slightly after. But I'm hoping now with the new process that we've got, we will be able to get alerts and work with companies more readily should we start to see those flags appear. So that's very much why we've put the process in place that Wayne has outlined for you today.
Thanks very much, Wayne, and thank you very much, Jane. Councillor Pete, would you like to respond?
Yeah, yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose the bit for me is the key is the project bank account, and glad to see that is now identified as a key risk. The only thing for me though is this project was advertised with a project bank account being in place, and therefore why did we not enforce that and make sure it's there? Or why did we not communicate subsequently to the subcontractors to let them know that subsequently that project bank account hadn't been set up? And I think just off the back of that, Chair, if I may, I really would just like to reiterate that I really would like to see a thorough case study of this particular one, if we could. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pete. So it sounds to me that there's something about a risk and a generic risk, which we can extrapolate from the experience in this Red Dragon experience, but also some kind of review and assurance. So can I suggest, and if this doesn't quite hit the mark, colleagues, please call out, but can I suggest, Wayne and Jane, that you review risk registers. It may or may not be a feature for the strategic risk register that we see. I'm not in a position to that's for officers to judge where this risk sits in the risk infrastructure of the local authority. But please, could you take an action to examine risk registers to ensure that there is a risk framed around this space with appropriate management actions and mitigation, albeit that the framework and governance that Wayne described to us and set out in his opening presentation does give a lot of assurance, and it does sound as though a lot of work has been done and a lot of the right things are in place, the right data, the right governance. But it would be good to be assured that there is a risk framed somewhere. And I would also like the committee to receive a paper following this to satisfy Councillor Peate's request for some kind of case study review and lessons learnt, and perhaps that uses the lens of the frame that that Wayne outlined in his earlier presentation as an assurance framework. You know, what worked, what didn't work. Why did aspects of that not work? You know, I think Councillor Peate's quite, if I can, Pete, quite impassioned final comments about something being advertised as having a project bank account, but actually it didn't. You know, so you know, those are real life things for people. So if we could have a case study review, lessons learned, and if we could have assurance that this risk has been managed appropriately going forward. I'll bring in Pete again, and I'll give you the last word, Jane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. I fully endorse the comments and the suggestions you've made in terms of taking this forward. The only thing I would add, I guess, is an offer to both Wayne and Jane to share the multitude of risks and questions that I've had from the subcontractors, if it helps just focus ourselves on exactly what these risks are in this particular case study. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Pete, and thank you very much for raising this, because it is a, you know, really brings it brings the framework and the theory to real life and actually demonstrates what this means for real people and real contractors working on the authority's behalf. Jane?
Yeah, I think the risk is recognised on our risk register. It's not escalated to the strategic risk register. It is managed at a service level. And I think in response to what we've seen, obviously, as we've outlined today, we've put a number of actions in place. Quite happy to take a review. I'm not sure how much of a review has already been done. I would need to check, because I wasn't aware this project was going to be mentioned specifically today, but I can follow up and see what understanding we have already, but more than welcome to bring that back to committee, and very helpful for Councillor Peate to share some more detail with us to help us with that as well. Thank you. Thanks
very much. So we don't meet until towards the end of November, so it's a full 2 months until our next meeting. So if it's possible, Jane, if review work has already started, if it's possible to have something on the November agenda, I think that would be really helpful.
We'll look to see what we can achieve.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Anything else for Wayne on this point from committee members? No. Wayne, thanks very much. The presentation was incredibly helpful and gives a lot of assurance, and if it could be, Connor, if the presentation could be circulated to members, that would be really helpful as well. So thanks very much, Wayne.
Thank
Much
you.
appreciated. Thank you.
I'll depart at this moment then, Chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much for your attendance.
All right.
That leads us on to agenda item 8, which is described as the flexible working arrangements presentation, and the presentation was in the pack. And this item is going to be led by Paul Bradshaw and Gemma Gabriel. So welcome to Paul and Gemma, and I'll hand over to you both to talk us through your presentation and the context in which we're having this conversation. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Chair. It's the first for what, because we're going to try and load the presentation up in Zoom. So over to my very able colleague Gemma for loading it up.
Yeah, we'll just share, hopefully.
It's there, Gemma, thanks.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. Okay, can you see that, Paul?
Yeah, you've got it in kind of, it's got all the slides open, but which is fine, but whatever mode you want to deliver it in.
Is that better?
Yeah. Bingo. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So yeah, so Gemma and I presented the presentation. That's just the first slide. Next slide, Gem.
Has that come through? It's changed on mine.
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
There it is. Yeah, good. Well, I've lost my bottom bar now. I need just to reduce the size of the screen, otherwise I'm stuck. Just bear with me, Chair. Just go to view options. I need to get my bottom bar back. No.
Should come back, Paul, if you click escape on the keyboard.
Escape. Oh yeah, thank you very much. Good idea. So in terms of the presentation, I met John Browskin in the chair, so thanks very much for that back in July. And arising from that, I think Gemma and myself will spend about 10 minutes or so just to take you through a bit of a journey and a story as to what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. Thanks, Gem. So we think for today there's four things just to run through. So we're going to look at what the flexible working arrangements are in Paris previously and today. We want to talk a bit about the health and safety and the well-being of staff, because obviously been through a difficult time, but in more normalised times. How we set out to support managers and how we can actually review and monitor performance and attendance. So they're the 4 key areas. I think the next slide. Yeah, if we go back to 2020, I think we were slightly ahead of the United Kingdom. I think around about the 16th to the 18th of March, we asked staff to go home quite kind of suddenly, and as they left, to take the grab bags or the laptops and so on, and start to work from home. Very early on, within a day or two, particularly from social services, there was obviously a call to work more flexibly for obvious reasons, and we on the back of that, we relaxed the flexible working arrangements. So if you think about the traditional kind of local authority type flexi schemes, you normally have core hours from around about 8:30ish to around about 5 o'clock, and people can normally accrue up to 10 hours to carry forward from one 4-week period into the next, or minus 10 hours. So we relaxed the traditional rules and we moved to a system whereby the core hours disappeared. It was just 24-hour working as and when needed. And staff could accrue anything up to 100 hours and carry it forward into the next month. We also obviously need to support staff working from home. And I thought the council did an excellent job because we provided workstations really, really quickly. I had my own workstation up and running within about 2-3 days of going home, and we kind of equipped people really, really well. Plus, we had excellent IT systems. So well done to the digital services team, because I think we had the best IT systems in place in Wales really, really quickly. And And looking around the rest of the country, I was obviously meeting my HR counterparts from the other 21 local authorities. Powys got there a lot quicker. We had bloody good arrangements in place really quick, and we were really conscious about the safety of staff working from home. Obviously, on the back of that, we need to adjust our policies. So we adjusted the policies to reflect that. Obviously, flexi policies, how people looked after children, because obviously they're working from home and had children at home as well. Towards the end of the pandemic, probably from an early stage in 2021, we started to talk about what we could learn from working differently and new ways of working. And Welsh Government started talking about an expectation that a percentage of public sector staff in Wales work from home more regularly. So that debate kind of started and moved on. So we'll go to the next slide. I think Gemma's picking up the next slide. Thanks, Gemma.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, that was the kind of emergency situation that we were in and how we adapted quite quickly. But then by the autumn of 2021, we were quite well established on our journey of reviewing the ways of working and how we wanted to work for the future. And like Paul said, we wanted to reflect on the experiences of the last of the 12 months prior to that, because we didn't just want to revert back to our old ways of working, but wanted to enhance on the benefits that we'd seen from some of these new ways of working and these new working practices, and how it could fit into how we wanted to deliver things moving forward. So it was an opportunity to deliver services in a different way, but still ensuring we continued the outcomes for the people of Powys. But also, when we went into that emergency situation, a lot of things were automated, and it was automated quite quickly. So we made significant strides in efficiencies in the ways in which we were working. So we wanted to take the opportunity to build on that, really, and not lose some of that which we'd already lost. So the new ways of working was established, and part of that created 3 categories of worker. So the first was place-based. And those were those members of staff that had a place of work that they went to and they fulfilled their work function at that place. So, for example, library staff or reception staff. Then we had on-the-go workers, and those were workers who would be required potentially to go to a place of work, but then they were on the go throughout the day. So, for example, our operatives in HTR, they would go to a depot in the morning, but then they would spend the rest of the day then on the highways. And then there was a third category of work, and there's approximately about 1,400 individuals that fitted into that group, and that was the flexible worker. And that's the worker where a lot of these arrangements were in place, where they had that flexibility in terms of potentially where they could fulfill their role. And it was that balance between their work-life balance and flexibility against the needs of the service. So a set of principles were established and agreed, and we can circulate those after the meeting. And that outlined and promoted discussion amongst teams and services. And that was complemented with additional guidance and FAQs, all of which will circulate. I'll put some links in the chat as well once I've finished these couple of slides. But essentially, services were asked to consider what activities they undertook and what would be the best way of delivering those activities and tasks, considering where they needed to be done and how. So teams were asked to consider team charters, which set clearly expectations amongst teams and agreed ways of working that all staff were signed up to. Teams were then prompted to think about when meetings needed to take place face-to-face and which ones would continue remotely. And one of the main considerations was how teams would continue to work collaboratively, but also support each other. So the types of questions that were in that principal documents that we were asking teams to think about was to reflect. So what worked well during the pandemic? What can we build on? How do we move forward with that? What needs to be in place for us to work flexibly? What are the kind of systems that we need? What are the structures that we need? What are the meetings that we need? But also, what are the potential risks? So, for example, lone working and on-site visits. Traditionally, a member of staff might be in the office, but would go out to undertake a visit and then come back to the office. If they were leaving their home and coming back to their home, what were the lone working arrangements to check that that person arrived home safely? So there were a number of things that we've had to think about as part of that as well. But also, how can we be creative in our thinking, ensuring that we're collaborating and coming together in our teams face to face, and how can we recreate that virtually? So these kind of questions were being asked. How can we ensure we're inclusive and fair, particularly in that hybrid environment, and ensure that people are working safely and healthily at home? How will colleagues communicate together? That comes back to the team charter. You know, a number of teams said if we're in team meetings, we expect people to put their cameras on, and there's some certain etiquette that teams wanted just to ensure that they were supporting each other and you're getting the best out of it. But also as well, and Paul will touch on this a little bit later, around identifying what support managers need of flexible workers to ensure that they're able to effectively manage them and ensure their performance and their attendance. But Paul will touch on that in a little bit more detail. So in addition to the core guidance, and there was significant guidance issued around this, there was a team set up that were set up to drive forward the implementation of NWOW. So setting up all of this guidance, meeting with managers, taking on board feedback, looking at data, looking at how we were working, and setting some of those general core principles that services then took away and implemented in the best way for their services to enable them to deliver what they needed to deliver. And the HRBPs as well were briefed, and they were a big part of engaging with services to ensure that consistency of some of those principles across services. Paul touched on the Flexi scheme, and I know some of the conversations started around this presentation around the Flexi scheme. And in February this year, the balances of staff were continuing to be monitored just to see where there might be high level of flexi balances across different services, and discussions then were taking place between managers and staff to discuss how to deal with those high balances and to start to bring those back down to a normal level. So there was a gradual reduction, and in August the report went to EMT because we felt we were at a point where we could agree that we would revert back to those normal limits. And some communications have gone out now, and with effect from November, those normal balances and carryover will be put into place.
Right, can I just jump in there, Gemma, and just say to everybody, when we set up new ways of working or NWOW, the key principle was it was an opportunity for services to look at how they could kind of work and deliver things in the future. So it wasn't to be put in place in one way. There wasn't one way of doing it. It was about how kind of greater flexibility would enable services to deliver outcomes that were better for the people of Powys. So the focus was very much on what more we could do to deliver better outcomes, whilst at the same time obviously reflecting on how we could also support the workforce. So it was two-pronged, but it was very much around people and outcomes. Thanks, Jem.
Thanks, Paul. So just moving on to the health, safety and wellbeing of staff, and clearly that was an important factor when we were looking at the new ways of working for some of those reasons that I've outlined earlier, particularly around lone working. And obviously through the pandemic, there was extensive support and guidance given to staff. It was a constantly changing landscape, and I think Powys managed exceptionally well to navigate through that and ensure that staff were supported and well communicated with through line managers and through corporate comms. And there was the silver and gold command groups that were put in place to effectively manage and monitor that process. And they were able to escalate then issues quite quickly as they arose. So the council's got a huge number and various of activities, as we all know, across the services. So it was a huge undertaking in terms of making sure that all those services and activities were kept safe and that there was clear guidance in place. And of course, you know, education, schools, health and social care, they were particular areas where there was that need for particular attention and specific guidance that was issued to staff. As Paul mentioned earlier, I think Powys was at the forefront of issuing equipment to staff during the pandemic, and it's been further developed. So that process now has been automated. So as staff join the council, there is an automated system where equipment can be allocated and also returned when people leave. And that's not just keyboards, monitors and laptops, but also desks and chairs, you know, significant amount of equipment that's gone out to staff to ensure that they are able to work safely and effectively at home. The DSE assessment process was also automated and is linked to appraisals so that we can clearly monitor easily who has and hasn't undertaken and reviewed that DSE assessment, again, so that we can ensure that people are working safely at home. PAT testing process was also introduced and has been working really successfully, and we're currently in our second round of that. There was various safe working safely infographics and guidance that was issued to staff. And again, that will be on the links document that I'll send across. But one example is around electrical safety. So whereas line managers would normally perhaps walk around an office and they would observe perhaps where there was PowerPoints that were overloaded with plugs, we need to give staff guidance as to how they undertake those safety checks safely at home to ensure that they're keeping themselves safe. So there were some infographics around that, but also wellbeing protocol that was introduced in 2021. And this was really important. And some of the key elements of that were encouraging staff to manage their own stress, what the triggers for that are, ensuring that managers had regular catch-ups, and was setting clear objectives, that staff were really clear what they were meant to be doing whilst working remotely. Work catch-up time, so they weren't just back-to-back in Teams meetings, that they were allowing times that they could catch up on work, and again, making sure that they're dealing with what they need to deal with, not just being in meetings. Lunch break protection as well was another key element of that, to ensure that people didn't necessarily have to take their lunch break within that time, but so that there was an hour in the day where there should be less activity, less people calling, so that people had a break to catch up. EAP, that's been long established support for staff, that's continued, and there's also been some specific support introduced, particularly around social care. That offers support, but also peer coaching to social work staff. So we've tied in with all those links as well with some of our partners to ensure that we provide some of that information and support to staff. And also surveys. Powers did 3 surveys during the pandemic, and we adapted the usual staff survey to gather information on the experience of staff during the pandemic and beyond. And when we compared ourselves with other authorities, I think we've done very well. We've really listened to our staff, and we've put things in place to support them. I think that demonstrates how people focused we are. And some of those surveys look at how valued staff feel, how well we're communicating with staff, how clear people are on their roles and responsibilities, and how they see their fit with the wider council. So it all ties in as well with how they're performing. If they feel valued and they feel that they've got clear objectives, they're going to be more effective and they're going to be more efficient. So we're testing that through our staff surveys to ensure that staff are being managed appropriately as well. But Paul will touch a little bit more now on a bit more of the detail around some of that support.
Could I interject for a second? Could you tell me, please, what DSE and EAP are? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Sorry. DSE is the desk assessment, a desk equipment assessment. So if people use IT equipment, it's to make sure that their monitor is at the right height, their chair, they're sat appropriately, that if they need any additional footrests or any support with using any kind of IT equipment, is to make sure that when they're working at their desk repeatedly, that they are working in a safe way.
It is a slight misnomer, John. It's DSE. It stands for display screen equipment, but it means the whole setup. So you work in a safe kind of manner, and you don't create kind of back injuries or wrist injuries. Thanks.
Okay.
And the EAP is Employee Assistance Service, and that is it's a helpline. Traditionally, people see it's a helpline for counselling, but also there's a whole wealth of information on there that the EAP provider gives support with, things like working safely at home, health and safety guidance, but debt monitoring. It's a support package really for staff.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Paul.
So in terms of next slide, I think it's worth just reflecting back on what Gemma said. Part of that was about the kind of historic situation over the last 2 or 3 years, but all that guidance and those ways of working are still in place now. So it's both historic and actual. I think the first bullet point here, remote working requires a different skill set for managers. I think today we're not going to do it, but if the 20 or so people in this room had a kind of a whiteboard or a flip chart, and we started to write up what that would entail, we quickly get to things like, it's going to be different. It is about keeping in touch with people. It's about being in regular contact. It's about looking after the well-being of staff at home. But it's also about how do you manage their performance. So it is about setting kind of clear objectives. It is about meeting regularly. It is about following things up. It is about having one-to-ones. But it's also about how do you keep that kind of person connected with the rest of the team. So it is about team working. It is about getting people in on occasions or fairly regularly to get together, to work together, to kind of generate ideas together. And it is also about building those social connections that happen in the office, but building the social connections in a different way. So we quite quickly get to those kind of things on a flip chart. Now, if I go back to when I was 30 and I did my professional qualifications, the CIPD, which is the kind of HR qualification, you always look for that kind of golden answer. So what more is it to managing people at home than that? And I've looked for that golden answer. And I know John Broughton did as well, because he shared a really good piece of work from an American university that was very relevant. But we've done that as well. And we looked at the universities in England and America. We've looked at the governments. We've looked at HSC, and we looked at IPD and so on. And one of the links Gemma will send you is a link to that kind of reference library where we placed all that stuff for managers to kind of peruse and use. But it doesn't say any more than what I just said. It doesn't get any further than where we would get to as a group. So our guidance and support to managers is, as I've just said, make sure you're in regular contact, make sure you do your appraisals, make sure you have one-to-ones, make sure you're setting clear objectives, make sure you're supporting the staff, and you're engaging in that more kind of collaborative teamwork in a kind of way. So that guidance support's been developed. It's available to them. We created a really, really good toolkit. It's about a 10-page infographic, and I think it's good because it's laid out really nicely and kind of pictorially, but it tells managers about what they can expect for staff, from staff, I should say, but it also therefore tells staff what they can expect from managers. So we've got some really good guidance in place. We also thought about, our kind of budding managers or developing managers and leaders. They go through the various ILM courses, and we have that delivered through the Welsh apprenticeship frameworks for free. When I say it's free, we, like all employers, pay a levy, but it's important we get these courses back from that levy, and we do. So as part of those ILM courses, we checked back with the 2 universities stroke colleges that deliver them to make sure they actually pick up the question of virtual working and virtual leadership as part of those leadership programs, and they do. My teams have checked the course materials to make sure it's in there. And universities and colleges aren't stupid; they know the world's changed, so they've automatically picked that up. But we wanted to reassure ourselves that it was actually there. Coaching is available, but I've kind of reflected since I met John and I met the chair. I've reflected a bit and thought, what's changed between 2019 and September 2023? And I think there's probably 3 areas of change. I think the first area of change is I started in 2019. If you go back and look at the appraisals we did in 2019, from memory, but also from the reports I've just read this week, appraisal saturation rates were around about 52% in Powers. So about 50 to 52% of staff had an annual appraisal. Now, I've worked around the country, and the best I've seen around the country is about 65%. So I was disappointed Powers was at 52, and I'd expect at least 65-ish. I looked in the system back in June, and Powers was up to 95%. So Powers had got from 52 to 95%. Colleagues around Wales were amazed and couldn't believe that also included roadworking staff and people spread all over the disparate kind of parts of Powys. Our staff survey we did in June, staff reported back that 95% of them had a staff survey, which is brilliant because that's what our system said. So staff experience was consistent with our business intelligence. But equally important, 94% of staff said they'd been set clear objectives. Now, if we go back to 2019, I think less than 50% of staff had clear objectives, and I don't know how many that was. I can't say because I don't think we asked that question. But today, 94% of our staff know what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing, so they've got clear objectives, which I think is brilliant. That's the first thing that changed. The second thing that changed is we're working differently. We've got about 1,400-ish staff working from home more regularly, but despite that, they've all got clear objectives. Despite that, they know what's expected of them and they know what they're doing. I think the other thing that's changed in that time is I think the council's got better and better at the performance management process. So I go to really highly structured kind of quarterly meetings now with my portfolio holder and others that are done within Modern Gov, and the minutes are captured and published publicly, I think. So we're very highly visible. Our performance is very highly visible. And we have really good corporate oversight of it. So, you know, EMT, SLT, cabinet and elected members have really, really good oversight of the performance that's happening. So I think we've got more staff that know what they're doing and why they're doing it, a clear action set. Our kind of performance management is highly visible. We've got great oversight of it, and we've got a great opportunity to monitor our performance and see where things are improving or not. And the only other thing that's different, as I say, is we've got 1,400 staff working either out of offices or at home in a kind of a flexible manner. Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, Paul. So it's the last couple of slides now. So it was just to kind of set up really how we're reviewing and monitoring all of these changes that have been put in place. So
Gemma, Paul, could I encourage you to I don't want to foreshorten too much, but could I encourage you to just move along, because we are quite over time.
Yeah, no problem. I can whiz through the next two. It was just really to say that, you know, just to reassure really that we are continually reviewing and monitoring those things that are in place. And the example given there is children's services. They've been constantly reviewing the new ways of working, what's working for them, what necessarily isn't potentially working for them, and what they want to try next. And one of which was about they've asked staff to come in for 2 days a week because they felt that it was important for people to meet face to face, to discuss some of those difficult decisions that they need to take as a service. Also newly qualified staff, to ensure that those staff are supported and inducted appropriately, and generally new staff. Those discussions are also taking place at SLT and EMT level, and also just to say with sustainable powers, as we deliver in our services and we're looking to change the delivery of our services, our workforce will be key to that. So these discussions around how our workforce need to work in order to meet the needs and the delivery of that service, all of that will just be continually reviewed. So it's just to reassure around that. So in terms of next steps, there was just a bit of a summary there in terms of what our key priorities are. Sustainable powers, which I've already mentioned, the flexi scheme, which I've mentioned, 4-day working week. I know there's a query raised around that. Paul might want to mention something around that, but that's slightly on pause at the moment because of some national pressures around that, and we're looking at alternative ways linked with our recruitment and retention around the offer. Recruitment and retention is key for us, so we do need to make sure that we're offering something that is attractive to the talent, to attract them to come and work for us, and attractive for them to stay, and it's balancing that with other needs of our service. So it's just to make the committee aware really that is certainly at the forefront of our minds, and of course ongoing service reviews that I've already mentioned. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Gemma, and thank you to Paul. Quite a wide-ranging presentation. If I can just remind the committee that the genesis of this, the genesis of Governance and Audit Committee's interest in this was flexi time and the operation post the change in the arrangements that were in place during the pandemic, and it grew out of one of our working groups. And that led us to seek assurance that the policy frameworks were as up to date as they needed to be and as comprehensive as they needed to be. So that's the kind of assurance and inquiry focus was, are the policies now where they need to be post-pandemic and keeping up with best practice? But as I said, the genesis was from conversations in one of our working groups about the application of flexi time during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And I can see that John has a question for you. So John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions about flexi time, but my main concern, Chair, is I think we need to have time to look at these new documents that are being made available to us on the new ways of working before we, pass over. Can I suggest that we have a look at it and put it an item on the next agenda, specifically having given the members a chance to study the documents that Paul's just posted?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very open to that, John. I think what I would encourage us to focus on, though, in this space is what is the role of Governance and Audit Committee? What is the role of our inquiry? We're not a scrutiny committee. We scrutinise, but we're not a scrutiny committee in the other sense. So in terms, what are we seeking assurance would be what I would really want to know. If we examine the documents, what's our end in terms of our remit? I do really want to be very clear about that.
I'm totally on board with that, but I think we've got to be assured that the what we're setting up in the council as a whole is fit for purpose.
Yeah, and assurance from senior officials as So perhaps, sorry, John.
I was going to say on flexi time, as I say, I've got a couple of points. Shall I raise those now? Mm-hmm. The first thing is how many people now have substantial number of hours still owing to them?
Have you seen the latest stats, Jen?
Yeah, and I don't have the latest stats in front of me, but I know that they've reduced significantly, and so there are only, I understand, a handful of members of staff that we're still working with in order to get those down. We're pretty confident that by November, staff will have got those balances down to normal levels, but I can certainly find that information out.
And perhaps if we're going to have an item on the next agenda, perhaps you could update that statistic for me. The second thing was, could you please explain why in the guidance that was issued yesterday, the requirement for core hours was taken out?
Since NMAR was introduced, John, services have been working flexibly. They're not working to core hours, so they've been removed to reflect the reality of the working situation in the council. Some staff will work to core hours, but not all staff work to core hours. So it's like a notional thing now for most staff. It's to reflect reality.
Well, I mean, in theory, somebody could sign on and do their work completely outside normal working hours. Is that satisfactory?
Yeah,
because it means that they...
On the new ways of working, the employee or the team will agree with the managers what hours they work to the best ends and best interest of delivery of outcomes that the people of Powys take in account to a degree of the needs of the individual. So an individual just can't decide how they're going to work and when they're going to work. They need to agree some of this relevant and appropriate with the line manager.
So we're replacing the core, the strict core element with the managerial guidance.
It needs to serve the interests of the council. So if you work in a job where service users need services delivered at certain times of the day, that's the kind of that's where the hours to be set around with a degree of flexibility. But where the service users' needs are different, then there'll be greater potential for flexibility, John.
Okay, I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Councillor David, and then after Councillor David, Councillor Peat.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of an observation than a question. I was very pleased to hear Paul saying that the figure for appraisal reviews in 2019 was about 50-odd%. And thanks to the new ways of working, we're now achieving 95%. How we've done that, I'm not sure I quite understand that aspect of it. But I think it's sometimes it's something that we tend to overlook. We often talk about corporate assets and asset reviews, etc., and the impact of that on our capital budgets. But because our biggest asset is our staff. And by looking after our staff, reviewing them, identifying their development needs, you increase loyalty, and that in turn has a beneficial impact on the revenue budget. So I just wanted to comment on that. That's excellent news, and great if we can maintain that. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Councillor David.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor David, for calling that out. Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple more musings again, I suppose. I agree with John's point about looking at this in a future meeting, and I would endorse that. But a couple of things that are just going through my mind at the moment that I personally would just like to try and understand. It's understanding the balance for me. So when I look at work from home, are we advocating work for home for the benefit of the staff, or for better delivery of services for the residents. So the point for me, I would just like to make sure we get the right assurance that we are still getting the best outcome for the residents of Paris, because that for me should be the priority. When I then look at the bullet point on a 4-day working week, again, the points come back to me is what are the costs around that, because we're already under budgetary pressures, as we know. So are we going to be paying a 4-day wage, a 5-day wage for a 4-day week? And again, what would the implications of that be on maintaining our services? So that's the couple of things I'd look at. And I guess just something I was just musing as well, sorry, whilst I ramble a little bit on Councillor David's comments there and what Paul said about appraisals. Yeah, also pleased to see that they're now up to 95%. But again, I guess for me, it's understanding how did we get to 95%? And what benefits have we got out of doing that, or was it just a bit of a tick box exercise to get us to 95? So I think there needs to be some drilling down behind that statistic. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Pete. My understanding from what you said, Gemma, was that the 4-day week is not something that we're going forward with. Could someone just clarify that and answer Councillor Pete's points?
Can I answer Councillor Pete's points and then we come back to the one? Yeah, I think on the why are we doing working this more flexible way with flexi? I think there's 4 or 5 things that come into play. One was the environment. So you got people not travelling across back and forth across Paris. There's definitely an impact, a better, preferential impact on the environment. There's costs. So we've taken a lot of savings out of car allowance costs from services, bits and pieces here. So we've made some savings out of it. There were the Welsh Government's expectations about a percentage of staff in the public sector in Wales working from home. So we've ticked that box, but that's not a primary reason. The next reason was outcomes. It's about working differently in a way that better supports the outcomes of services to the people of Paris. So there's a mechanism or an operating model to improve our outcomes. And then fifthly, it obviously supports recruitment and retention. So people do now look for more flexible type of jobs, and there is an expectation in certain jobs that it's flexible. So there's about 5 reasons why we've done that. The 95% thing, what we did was it's from really, really good management to strong management, strong performance management. So we put every head of the service had an outcome within the outcome, an objective set each year, which was to drive that up. And it's a bit of kind of heads of service were incentivized to get it done, and it's worked. 95% of people are having appraisals, and I think the proper appraisals, it's not a tick box exercise, it's actually happening. What we do see in the council is good performance. When we have our quarterly meetings, we see outcomes being delivered, and that comes from the first thing, which is managing people properly. The 4-day working week thing, I'm on a national group across Wales, across the public sector in Wales, and we met as recently as yesterday, and we're looking at how we set up a pilot. So there's a group trying to develop pilots within Wales. It'll take a paper, I think it's going to be next March now. We'll take a paper forward as to how that pilot could potentially be done. So we're working nationally. We've got our finger right in the middle of that particular process. More locally, we had about 110 things we wanted to do to improve recruitment and retention in Paris. The 4-day week was one of them. It's on that list. It's not at the top of that list at the moment, and it's not at the top of the list partly because there's a pilot, there's a programme being developed in Wales, but secondly, there's been a challenge within the UK about South Cambridgeshire District Council and what they're doing. So we're watching and we're looking and we're learning. And we've not reached the stage where we've got the empirical evidence that answers the questions the Councillor Pete just asked. I'll come later, and as soon as we know that, we'd be happy to share the thinking. I'm sorry, Gemma, of course, in then. Did you have more to say about the 4-day week?
No, I think you've covered it all. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Jane, did you want to come in?
I think Paul covered most of the points, so I'll leave it there, Chair.
So thanks very much. I was on mute when I said thanks very much, Paul and Jenna.
No, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Right, okay, thanks. And we may revisit some of this if we have another agenda item in November around assurance of the fitness for purpose of the policy package that's been developed. Thanks very much both for all the work that you've put into giving us this presentation.
Pleasure.
So I'm afraid, colleagues, we are running about half an hour slow. So without foreshortening things, I think we do need to work out how to sort of make up a little bit of time and possibly have a 5-minute break, because these meetings are very long and I think people concentrate better if they have a 5-minute break. So I'm suggesting, Jane, if we could move to agenda item 9, which I hope won't take too long, but equally, you know, members need to discuss this if they wish. Jane, item 9, the amendment, possible amendment to part of our terms of reference.
Yeah, happy to go to that. I'm hoping Connor is going to be my able assistant here. And put just as we say it, it appears. So I think
disappears.
Sorry.
Yeah, you'll recall we were not content, I think, generally that the wording in the terms of reference accurately reflected what was now happening. So before you there, you see the current wording of the terms of reference for the Governance and Audit Committee is that they approve the annual audit plan, ensuring there is sufficient and appropriate coverage with a strong emphasis on risk management and resources are available to implement the plan. We're proposing the wording is amended to reflect the more agile plan that we have. So the wording, as you can see there, says that we approve on an annual basis the audit plan. So it's only a very slight tweak to the words, but I think it does make a considerable difference. And the rest is there for you to see. So the proposal, if the committee, well, it's terms of reference for the committee, so it's not really the committee's gift to set those terms of reference. But what I am saying is I will propose that to the Democratic committee so that they can review it and be comfortable in terms of changing the terms of reference to that wording. Sorry, that was a bit trying to do it quickly. Hopefully that's okay.
Thanks, Jane. And then my understanding is if Democratic Services Committee is content that it would go to a meeting of the full council.
I believe that is the case, yes. So it may take a little while to work through that process, but that's the case. And
I mean, colleagues will remember some of the discussions we had in the context of the annual audit plan, and it's my strong belief that as a committee we should have an annual discussion of the audit plan, albeit the plan is an agile plan. I still think we need an annual approval process.
Yeah.
And I think that has to happen before the beginning of the financial year in which the audit rolls. But I would like members to have the opportunity to comment on this wording before Jane takes it forward through the authority's governance process. If there are any comments, please show your hands. Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I didn't want to get too hung up on semantics, I guess, but I suppose approve on an annual basis, just picking up on your point, there aren't any timescales in there. So whether we need to say approve at such and such a meeting, and then I guess you could then say the audit plan. The question would be which one. That would be my only comments around it, is whether that wording is actually tight enough.
Good point. I think I should probably put in internal audit plan, because there will be other audit plans around the accounts. I'll check and see what happens with other committees and whether the dates are specified. I think we can work to the timeline that Lynn set out. I think it's more than appropriate that it is approved before the start of that particular year. So I'll just check that through and I can maybe add that in.
Thanks, Jane, and Councillor Peat will definitely have it in our forward work plan that that there will be an annual approval in Q4, so in some time between January and March.
Thanks,
so
Jane.
even if it doesn't end up in the wording, it will be on our forward work plan, so that it happens in a timely fashion. So our colleagues broadly content, subject to Jane pursuing Councillor Peat's points, broadly content that we go forward to make this amendment, which I think will both reflect the need for an annual consideration and the reality of SWAP's agile planning approach.
Yes.
I'll take having no hands up as broad agreement. Okay, Jane, fine. Right, notwithstanding the fact that we're quite slow on time, I think we need to have a 5-minute break. So can I suggest that we reconvene at 12:10? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks. That's us returned from our break, and we'll move on to the swap items. So Ian, if you could briefly introduce your progress report and give us any other swap updates of relevance. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Members will see that this report I'm presenting today follows the style of the previous reports. It's item 10 and it's on page 115. It's the first report that I'm presenting using data from our new audit management system. And I think the key benefit from that is around agility and timeliness. You know, sometimes we present committee reports that can be, you know, a couple of months out of date. And in fact, this report is only just over a week old. So the information contained in it is very timely. It's very of the moment. So I think that's one of the benefits that we're going to get from using the new system. In terms of the report itself, I'll just quickly run through the headlines. In terms of coverage, the new system again gives us lots of different views and slices of how we look at coverage. The first view looks at the strategic risk, and that shows the coverage at this point in time. So as we do more audit work, then that coverage map will change and will increase and be more mature, but it shows where we are at the moment. Ultimately, the coverage will look at a 2-year cycle so that we can see what we've done over the last 2 years in those risk areas. I think it's fair to say that not every audit will be aligned to corporate risk, and not every corporate risk will have internal audit work. But I think it's just a good measure of alignment of internal audit work to those areas that the council think are the most risk. The second view in terms of coverage is a new one. It looks at how we look at those in terms of SWAP's top 10, and that's on page 118 or page 3 of my report. And then there's the final view, which is by something we call the healthy organisation. And a healthy organisation are those core processes and core areas of assurance that the business needs to function successfully. And so overall, I think coverage is reasonable. I think there are some areas that indicates that we need to keep our eye on around probably, you know, planning, housing, the local economy. But I think at this stage, it's still fairly early data to make, you know, key judgments on. And it's hard to determine whether this is just somewhat a bit of a blip because of that limited data source, or in fact, there are more serious underlying themes there that we need to pick up as part of our internal audit planning process. Page 4 looks at activity, and there's a graph in there that shows you the activity. And so far at this point in the year, we've completed 29% of work, and there is 28% of work in progress. So at the moment, we're on track to deliver the audit plan and to give the annual audit opinion. In terms of outcomes, at this stage, again, 86% of the work, the opinion-based work, is positive. So that's certainly in line with what we've had in previous years, and certainly doesn't cause me any issues at this stage. And in this report, there are no areas of significant concern to present. But just to make you aware that I will be coming to the next committee with a school-themed review that will have a number of issues in there. So they are on the horizon, and we will bring them to your attention as they arise. And then on page 6, I'd like to draw your attention to a new aspect of the report, and that's root cause. Now, root cause is a process that identifies the fundamental underlying reason that causes that issue. So, I mean, predictably, in the graph, you'll see that it's due to policies, processes, and systems. that's not unusual for what I would expect. But I think as we get used to categorizing these more successfully, we'll see a pattern in there that will indicate if there's a wider theme that goes across the organization, either by the whole organization or by service area. The second table in there is issues, again, by healthy organization. So it drills down to those core areas of business. The top score in there is financial management. I've done a deeper dive into that area, and when I look at the issues, 2/3 of those issues are around non-compliance by the services, rather than problems we have with core financial systems. So again, that's an indicator. And I think as we go on and get more data, we'll be able to drive down again into those. It's still early days, but as I say, as data matures, we'll get a better picture. And I think those trends and patterns will be used in future audit plans. On page 8 or page 123 of the big agenda pack is Appendix A. Now, Appendix A lists the completed work for the year with their opinions and their outcomes. Under the completed work tab, it also lists the work in progress, and it shows you in that graphic where they are in terms of the delivery of that process. So you'll see that, for example, 5 are in draft report on there. So they will be soon going from draft to final. So you'll see some more work coming through. And just to say that this data is kept up to date. It's live. So if I look at my dashboards today, they will show a slightly different picture again. And the last 2 tables are the waiting to go live and the future proposed work. So they're two sections of work that are to be done. So they're still waiting to be done. So finally, I'll conclude with the overall indicative opinion for 23-24 that at the moment it appears reasonable. I'll welcome any questions, members.
Thanks very much, Ian. That's really helpful. Can I just make a couple of kind of connections back to the rest of our agenda, which I hope kind of underscores how helpful Ian's report is. And just one of the things that was on my mind, and I suspect it might be on Councillor Peate's mind, was on page 3 of your report, page 118 of the pack, in terms of coverage. The adequate item on coverage is contracts, procurement and commissioning, which just strikes me as quite interesting, given the conversation that we had earlier in the agenda, where Councillor Peate raised the risk profile and asked officers if they would revisit the risk profile in connection with lessons learned from the Red Dragon project in Newtown. It's just interesting that that the coverage on this is adequate, given that we had that conversation. And then the other kind of connection I was making was to where was it? Oh yeah, on your root cause analysis, policies, process and systems, given the conversation that we've just had about HR, policy, process and systems. You know, it's quite interesting that your root cause analysis indicates that policy, process and systems is a significant factor. And then we were just having a similar conversation around, are we assured that the HR policy, process and systems are where they need to be? Just a couple of, connections with the broader agenda, which I hope kind of demonstrates that how helpful your report is. I'll stop wittering and I'll bring in John, and then I'll bring in Councillor Peate.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, my question is quite parochial. I chair the working group that's working on the original 5 reports on highways, which you're doing a follow-up on. When might we expect that work to be finished? Because I'd like to wind that committee up and finish it. I
think if you go to the actually on the rolling plan, which I'll look at.
I'm looking at it now. most of them are, well, they're all 75% complete, but some of them have got some further work to be done.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that even since this point that last week, we've moved it on even further, and some are very near to the finalisation process. We've already had closing meetings on a lot of the audits, and I certainly within the next 2 to 3 weeks, all of those pieces of work will be in final.
Right. So if I if Connor schedules for us a meeting in November, it should have those reports available.
Yes, and I don't think I'll be giving anything away, but certainly it's fair to say that in the work we're doing at the moment, we're seeing improvement. Certainly, we're seeing improvement.
Well, that was our conclusion as well, but it's nice to have it confirmed. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks, John. I'll bring in Councillor Pete and then Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, I was going to raise exactly the same point as yourself, so I won't say too much. But yes, it was why when I saw the coverage being adequate and the I think opinion being reasonable, I really didn't think a reasonable opinion in this particular area is adequate for me, and that was why consequently I did request and ask for a case study, which pleased to see that Jane and Wayne said they would do. Thank you.
Can I comment, Chair? Is that okay?
Yes.
I think what we've got here is base information, and we're going to learn to use it. The category of commissioning, procurement, and contract management, it's a very large area, and so maybe we need to break it down a little bit so we've got a little bit more intelligence about where that fits. So I'll happily go away and have a look at it and break it down and see how it fits in. And if it's telling me there are issues, particularly in that contract management side and procurement, more than happy to do that.
Good. Thanks very much, Ian. Much appreciated. And thanks, Councillor Pete. Jane.
Yeah, I think I was going to pick up on that as well. I think I really like this report and the change and the emphasis that it's getting now, because you're seeing a much broader context of the audit work and what we're seeing in that, and those two particular graphs. And I think absolutely it gives you that triangulation against other aspects of what you see as this committee. So I really like how this is coming together, and I think absolutely looking at the concerns raised today on one particular contract, it's good to see that this work is actually showing that that's not necessarily the same everywhere, but it is still important to really hone in on where we do identify where things are a little lacking and that we address it. But this will really help us, I think, to be more proactive around that and used effectively, which is what we need to do. This, I think, is going to be a big improvement and really help us in terms of strengthening the governance, the process and compliance.
Thanks, Jane. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick thought on what Jane said. Yes, I do appreciate that one particular instance may not mean that there's loads of other instances out there, but also the converse is true as well. Is there might be other instances that we haven't found out there that we don't know about yet. So I wouldn't want to be too complacent around this, and as I say, hence that was just my initial, I suppose, concern around it being adequate coverage and reasonable opinion. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further points or questions for Ian, please, on his report? Okay, I'll move us on in that case to agenda item 11, which is our risk deep dive. And this focuses on the financially sustainable budget. I don't know whether Councillor David wants to say anything, or if Jane, if you're leading off, or Jane and Mary, I believe, are leading on this. But Councillor David, the opportunity is there if you want to say anything.
If I start, I don't know,
yeah.
And perhaps David come in as we sort of work through it, unless you want to say anything at the start, David.
Just to put a point on it, with regard to risk and budgets, I think first thing we have to accept that any budget is going to contain an element of risk. And the larger the budget, the more risk that might contain. And you can even go, if you go down to a basic household budget, because of external exogenous impacts on such a budget, you're going to have problems actually controlling it and managing it, and that's going to develop a risk within the budget itself. But coming back to budgets at authority level, I think what we've got to bear in mind is that from 2010, that the UK suffered a period of austerity. It was Welsh authorities were protected until 2012, but nevertheless, from 2012 onwards, we were in a period of austerity and settlements were reducing. 2019, 2020, we even had the Prime Minister then, in fairness, saying that we were out of austerity and things were going to be better. But then, of course, we were impacted by COVID. And that, as we know, cost the country, economically, it cost us billions of pounds in support and lost productivity, etc., etc. We came out of COVID, and then because of a failure actually to have the supply instruments in place to meet the increase in the spike in demand, that in itself generated a level of inflation. And then we had the impacts of the Ukraine war. I think we'd have had a certain level of inflation without the Ukraine war, but it wouldn't have reached the levels it did. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is that during that period, we've had these exogenous impacts coming at us from all directions, and that in itself has made it far more difficult to actually set budgets and make them sustainable. But I think it's fair to recognise that during that period, we have set balanced budgets, and obviously that's a credit to my predecessors as well. We're working with Finance Service, but the problem is still with us, and it's going to be significantly more difficult for the coming years, I believe anyway, because of the new pressures that we're facing now and the economic climate that we're actually living in. So that's just to set the scene from my perspective, that it's going to be very, very difficult. If you're going to try and argue that you can take risk completely out of budget setting, I don't believe that is possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor David, for setting the context that we're operating in, and I'll hand over back to Jane and Mary for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So within the pack, you have a reminder of the risk as it appears in the risk register, and you see that regularly through the quarterly updates. But this obviously today is going to do a little bit more of a deep dive in terms of that. So the first slide here shows you the scoring of this particular risk. And you can see there, both in terms of inherent risk and the residual risk, even after we've taken that mitigating action, this still is a significant risk to the council, and I think that's recognised there in the scoring that you see. So it's important that we do all that we can to mitigate and be able to deliver what we need to do in terms of our budget. And I think this scoring has been, I think the risk has been on the risk register for some time, because it is always a risk, as you say, but that scoring has increased to those levels more recently as we've responded to everything that we face from that economic perspective. And I think Councillor David has already covered some of the next slide in terms of the background in which we're operating. So I'm not going to go back through it. As I say, Councillor David already picked up on a number of these. And probably down the bottom end of this, we are now dealing with that higher levels of inflation and higher interest rates, and that is having a major impact on the council's finances and the cost in terms of delivering our services. So there continues to be that significant risk to our own council's financial resilience, and I think you see that played out more so nationally as well. We've seen a number of authorities move with 114 notices and so on, particularly in England. That hasn't happened in Wales to date. But obviously, the pressure is really on for all councils to be able to manage within the resources that they have. If we move on to the next slide, it talks about the mitigating actions that we have in place. So these are just some reminders of what we do have. We have a medium-term financial strategy. Audit Wales undertake a number of reviews and feedback to us. We have those ongoing discussions nationally through the Welsh Treasurers and through the WLJ and Welsh Government. And that's been critical, I think, to all local authorities over the last couple of years. You regularly receive financial monitoring reports, and the commentary included in them is clear in addressing what those issues are and the risks there, but at an individual service level. The Commercial Risk Board, Wayne presented this morning, some of the things that we're doing there, that is also a fundamental piece of the mitigation. And early engagement with services through last year enabled us to deliver on the budget that we finally came to at year end. And that early engagement and continual dialogue with services who may have to change and adapt as things change has really stood us in good stead, I think, last year, and will continue to do so, I hope, as we move through the next couple of years. Financial management code and our self-assessment against that is obviously a key aspect of that as well. And Sustainable Powers programme and how we reshape the council for the future is fundamental to that continued financial resilience. Moving then on to the next slide, this talks more about that financial resilience. We do draw on the 4 pillars of financial resilience from CIPFA, and those are really about getting that routine financial management right. Audit comes into this, you know, making sure that our processes are up to where they need to be, but also it is about compliance then with those processes. So I think this really shows how so many aspects of what we do all come together to give us that assurance and make sure that we can deliver a sustainable budget. Benchmarking is being developed. That continues to be so. We've made some strides on that. I don't think it's where it needs to be across the whole organisation, but definitely moving into the right sphere. And it's important that we can deliver on our plans and have assurance and track delivery of those savings throughout the year, as well as managing reserves, because obviously they are the backstop, if you like, in terms of our financial resilience across the council. Moving on to the next slide, the role of myself as the 151 officer, I have that key responsibility to make sure that the council understands its position, takes appropriate action at all times to make sure that we continue to be in the best place from a budget perspective. You get my opinion on any budget report, and I give that opinion to the whole council, and that's a requirement of the Act. And the extract is there from last year's budget looking at that. And of course, the key duty for myself, along with other financial officers, is that statutory duty to issue that 114 notice if it's believed that the council is unable to meet its expenditure commitments. And that's when you see those notices put into council for action and immediate action. And I think it's important that we look at what's happening elsewhere and learn the lessons from that as well. And CIPFA have been quite fundamental in this in terms of publishing various documents, which I have already in my armoury, if you like, in terms of what those 114 notices elsewhere have taught us and how we can make sure we are doing as much as possible here to mitigate that. Moving on to the next slide. Audit Wales do an assessment. They've done an assessment over the last couple of years. And they have been keen to put some recommendations in place. And again, we've been working against those as we've developed our plans moving forward. So those are very helpful in terms of giving us that assurance as well. We do have a gap in our medium-term financial plan at the moment, and making sure that we can address that and be a bit more forward thinking in terms of that as well. You know, we have worked with annual plans due to some of the pressures we faced more recently, but we must move to that more detailed plan that looks to balance a budget over a longer period of time, and we're working on that now shortly. Our usable reserves have grown between some financial years. That was recognised in the Audit Wales report. I think we saw that happen over the last couple of years, particularly towards year end when we received additional funding. And we did take opportunity then to really strengthen our position financially, and we have increased the reserves, and already those are proving fundamental to help us get through these peak periods now where we're seeing those costs really impacting on our budget, and we will be drawing on those reserves as you've seen in our monitoring reports this year. We've got quite a low liquidity ratio for the council. Again, members will have seen that reported through the Treasury Management briefing you had recently, where our advisors were keen to express their opinion that we were in a stable position, and we have managed that effectively for some time. So I think all of this, again, is adding to that assurance. Moving on to the next slide. Financial planning update and dashboard. So you will be aware that Cabinet received a report on the 19th of September that gave Cabinet and the Council an update on where the financial position is, the impacts of the economic projections that is having on our budget, and what that has done in terms of increasing the gap on our longer term plan. So that's something clearly we will be addressing now. Within that report as well, we've introduced a financial resilience dashboard. And again, this starts to build some key snapshots to keep the council informed and to give you a better overview of where we are in terms of that financial resilience. And we'll look to actually improve on that dashboard over a period of time. But there are a number of graphs and slides in that pick up on various aspects of our financial resilience and benchmark ourselves both in terms of trend, but also against other authorities across Wales there as well. And moving on to the next slide. SIPFA Financial Management Code, 6 key principles there in terms of good financial management. And we are monitoring ourselves against this code. And again, we regularly report that. Finance Panel had a briefing now recently with the actions that we're taking to strengthen that to meet those principles. I'm not going to spend too much time going through that one as there's been that opportunity to go through that in more detail already. I think we can skip over that one as well, please, Mary. So other elements of control, this is just a reminder really of some of the key governance arrangements that we have in place. The financial regulations are embedded in our constitution and they clearly set out roles and responsibilities for everyone across the council, members, officers, budget managers and all staff. We have the internal audit assurance framework, and as you've just seen in terms of what the improvements we're seeing on the internal audit work programme and what it's covering, I think adds to that assurance. And of course we have the statutory audit assurance scheme or framework rather that's supplied by Audit Wales annually as well. Our budget setting regime is quite robust, and I think we've seen that, and that really plays out in terms of being able to deliver against our budget plans, as David pointed out earlier on. We have consistently delivered on those budgets as set, and some have been quite favourable in terms of the last couple of years, although I don't expect there to be that much leeway, I don't think, in our budget plans as we move forward. I think the position we see ourselves in is going to be much, much tighter, and we will have to be much tighter in terms of our budgets and delivery against them over the next few years. We've also got the Capital Oversight Board in place, and we have those Treasury and Capital Management performance indicators that are regularly reported as well. So all of this adds to that assurance. And I think that comes to the end of the presentation. So there's a lot in there, and I have whipped through that rather quickly, but I think committee and finance panel will have seen much of what I've just expressed there. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jane. It's a really comprehensive set of slides. If Connor, if they could be circulated to members as well, that would be really helpful. Open to questions to Jane, Mary and Councillor David. Councillor Pete?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and echo your comments about thanks to Jane and Maria there for a very thorough, comprehensive presentation. I do understand the difficulties around this, and it's not easy, and I do also agree and accept Councillor David's comment that you can't take all the risk out of budget setting. So fully understand that. I suppose just the one thing for me from a distance, without going into any specifics, is when I sort of see some of the budget lines being over and some of the budget lines being down. I just wouldn't want us to lose sight of what for me is one of the major mitigations that we can have in place, which is the robust budget setting process. Because if we have a robust budgeting process almost at line levels, that would help us to achieve delivering a sustainable budget. And I guess the key to that is like learning from past experiences of where forecasts for certain items, certain services have varied significantly to the budget. As long as we pick up on those points, so as when we come to do the following year's budgets, we've learned from those experiences. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Pete. Jane, do you want to respond to that?
Only to say absolutely. And one of the first tasks we do when we're looking at the following year's budget is to review the variances from the previous year and make sure that those are corrected, realigned, whatever we need to do in terms of the budgets going forward. So yeah, absolutely critical.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Councillor Pete, for the question. Any other questions for Jane? I'm not seeing any hands, Jane, Councillor David and Mary. I'm going to take that as a testament to the thoroughness of your presentation and the confidence that the committee has in your professionalism and in your work and your regular updates. Councillor David.
Just very briefly, Chair, to follow on from what Councillor Pete's highlighted, that does concern me when we see major overspends or underspends against a particular service area, but Jane's quite correct. We would look at that in some detail, and I think it's important we understand what impact that particular service might have suffered within the previous 12 months. But just rest assured that we do look at it all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David, and thank you, Councillor Pete, for your questions, and Mary and Jane for a really good presentation. Thanks. I'll move us on to Councillor David's hands up. That's okay. I'll move us on to agenda item 12, which is the working group reports. Given the time and how over we are, I'm not proposing to talk particularly to or go through the internal audit working group report. Safe to say that we've had 2 meetings and we are planning monthly meetings over the next 6 months to get a bit of momentum into our work, but I'm happy to take any questions that colleagues may have. I'm going to pause there for questions on that internal audit working group report. If there are no questions, I'll ask Gareth Hall if he wants to give us any update on finance panel's work. Very briefly, if Gareth could do that, if he's with us. I think he might have gone.
I think he had another meeting at leave for.
Yeah, I mean, I was also at finance panel last week, and you know, I can only say that it was an extremely good meeting serviced by Jane and her team, and that the financial reporting is good. And as we've already heard from the deep dive that we've done, you know, the financial context in which we're operating is extremely challenging, and not diminishing the work of finance panel, but that's kind of it in a nutshell, the nature of the discussion. It's a good meeting. It's well chaired by Councillor Allard. I know he's here if he wants to add anything. No. Councillor Allard, is there anything you want to add about finance panel's work?
No, not really.
and thanks for your attendance as well. It is important that that we review the performance of the financial performance of the council, and I got great faith in Jane and the team as well. But Councillor Lewington makes a really good point. I wish we could have that long-term view about the direction of the council when we're talking about significant changes and the alignments between the revenue and the capital investment, because capital investment is such a long-term issue. We really do need a clear direction from the council so we can align those, and it'll enable confidence in solid service delivery as well as being sustainable into the long term. But no, thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Councillor Allen. Actually, thank you for reminding me that long-term capital planning is something that Gareth Hall would have raised had he not had to leave the meeting. He may have raised it under item 11 or under item 12. Gareth chairs our capital working group, and one of the recommendations that the capital working group is going to be coming forward with is that we move forward to 10-year capital planning programme, not least because of the kind of UK and Welsh Government capital finance context. So I think it's quite important, just for the record, that I know Gareth would have mentioned that had he been here, and he would have agreed with Councillor Allen's remarks. Agenda item 13 is our work programme.
Can I interrupt for a second? Are we still quorate? I'm just looking at the attendance here, and we seem to be very low on members.
Three. I think we're allowed 3.
We're okay. We're just there then.
Yeah, as long as we have at least 2 members, Chair.
Oh, is it 2? Right. Okay.
Yes.
Because Councillor Pete's still here. Yeah, and you and I are still here.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that.
No. It's a good question to ask. Work programme. Any comments? I'm going to suggest Pete.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just what perhaps maybe a cheeky one, but could we just add to November to review the case study for the Red Dragon site, please?
Yes, we will. Absolutely. Thanks. Yep. Anything else for the work programme? I think I'd like to thank Connor for the improvements that have been made to the work programme going forward. So it's really helpful to have a robust forward work programme. Moving to item 14, and thank you very much for your patience, Diane, because we've not really run to time. But colleagues will recall that at our July meeting, we took an advisory internal audit assessment of the IT and technology capability within the authority. And Diane is here today to give us assurance of the management response and the work that is in hand in response to that advisory audit. So I'll hand over to you, Diane, with apologies for keeping you longer than we had anticipated.
No worries. Thank you very much. Okay, so we in the council we used to have traditional ICT assurance across different aspects of the ICT service, and as technology moves on at an alarming rate, we were discussing with the SWAP team about how we could improve the audit and to make sure that we gave the organisation the assurance it needs. The technology assurance framework is a new framework that's being brought in by the SWAP team, and has only been had limited testing across a couple of organisations. So it's a very new way of completing audits. So, and I think there's learning on both sides for us as an organisation and the SWAP team around how it's working and how that's progressing. So we have been working really closely with the SWAP team, and they've been really supportive of trying to work out how this new audit will work and how it will help give the assurance to the organisation going forward. But obviously we do need to I think the position will be in the future, you have the assessment at the top that will highlight the areas that you need to go deep diving in. But until that whole process has been completed once, we need to get, we can't really have the full picture of what that means. I have been through the whole assessment with our executive management team. They're assured that at the moment we need to complete the whole process to make sure that we don't have any major issues, but the assurance framework is really saying that, you know, they haven't identified anything quickly at a top level, although they do want to investigate further the ICT strategy element, because we've moved to a more transformative approach with a digital strategy, a digital transformation framework, and then making sure our basic day-to-day elements are robust and transformed as part of that digital transformation process. So our executive management team are assured. I think last time when you discussed the report, there were a couple of elements that you wanted to pick up. And one was, do we actually monitor whether policies are being adhered to? And that's a really difficult one. So when policies are actually put out, we put them out through a piece of technology at the front end so that we know that staff have read them and they tick they've read them before they can go on their computer for the day. But actually some of the content of those policies is very wide reaching and very broad. So for instance, you know, one of the policies is that you don't go on gambling sites, but we also run a lottery within the council, so some service users might need access to those gambling sites, so we do give them access. We try to shut down, you know, places where people shouldn't be going, but when we open it up, then we have to rely on the staff adhering to those policies without us having to check, because we'd be checking a myriad of different policies, a myriad of different ways. And actually we, you know, to be able to check all of that, then monitor the reports would be, you know, along with the policing style, isn't it, of law. So, you know, you'd have to have rafts of teams, and we don't have the ability to do that. But if any manager is concerned about people not adhering policies, we can run off reports off the systems, etc., should any of those cases occur. So I hope that answers that one. The timescale of the 31st of October for the data centre review, you wanted assurance that that could take place, and yes, it can, and that review has already started. And you also wanted assurance that there was further work by the 30th of September to do a detailed review of the ICT strategy, and that work has already commenced. But in the meantime, between the assurance framework being completed and this next stage of work being undertaken, Audit Wales have actually conducted a piece of work across Wales on digital strategies, and I think the SWAP team are just connecting with the Audit Wales team to see what the learnings were and whether we need to continue on the internal investigation, because we don't want to be audited over the same thing twice, really. And I think that covered all the points, unless there's any other questions.
Thanks very much, Diane. Councillor Pete, I know you wanted to have your points been addressed by Diane.
Yes, they have. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Diane. I suppose it was just if I may, just add one comment around the adherence. Is yeah, no, I do understand all what you said there, Diane, around how difficult it is to monitor that. But I guess the flip side of that is we end up with a policy that we've written because we need a policy. It sits on a shelf gathering dust, and I suppose it was just, how do we make this come alive for staff? And I don't know, is there some form of small annual test or something? I don't know, because I do understand the difficulties, but it just worries me it becomes a tick box exercise to have a policy rather than a policy we use, if that makes sense.
Of course, we do have the cyber security and information training that happens on an annual basis where people have to update. So that does refresh people's thinking about different areas, and we do refresh the policies on a regular basis, so every 3 years. And when we refresh the policy, we put that out again to remind staff. So and we try to, well, we're trying to at the moment make sure that they don't come all in one go, and that they're kind of slotted as a regular reminder to all the different policies we have to update.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Ian, I'll bring you in a minute, but Councillor Pete's question just makes me think again about Ian's report that we looked at earlier in the root cause analysis section, which was which focused in on policies, procedure and systems, which again is quite interesting given this conversation. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder whether Diane could give me an update on how we're sitting for disaster recovery and business continuity at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So our business continuity process, we've been working with services to identify the key business items that need getting back offline. So should we be hit by anything untoward, and we need to get the business continuity systems, the quickest ones, you know, the ones that are most important, up and running as soon as possible. We've developed what we think is our business continuity plan, and we're just testing that out at the moment. We're on disaster recovery as well. We've run some workshops with the whole executive management team and senior leadership team on if we did have that disaster. So we've got an in-the-box exercise, emergency response exercise. So as if this disaster happens, how would we respond? What kind of information do we need? How would we communicate? Those kind of exercises. And we do have another one planned for later this year or early next year.
Okay, thanks, Diane.
Is that okay, Ian?
Yeah.
Good, thanks very much. Ian, is there anything else you would like to comment on in terms of management's response to the advisory audit?
Not particularly, other than I take on board Diane's comment around working together, and I think making sure that we have complete coverage and building on this. You know, there's a technology assured framework piece of work, and then there's a security framework that will give us a bigger picture of where we are as a council. That will allow us then to drill down. So we'll get those pieces of work done, and then we'll make sure that we coordinate to give the committee and the council assurance.
Thanks. That sounds good. Any further questions, please? Nope. Thanks very much, Diane, and thank you for your patience because we didn't stick to time. And thank you. Moving swiftly on, therefore, to item 15, which is the Q1 strategic risk report. Bets, please assume that everyone's read the report. Thank you very much for your report and your work. If you could introduce briefly the key points, and then I'll open it for questions. Thanks very much for coming.
Yeah, no worries, of course. So morning all. Keeping it very brief. As you all know by now, the purpose of this report is to set out the council's latest position on managing its key risks, which are contained in the Strategic Risk Register. You'll have in the covering governance and audit report the purpose of the role, so I'm going to whiz over that. Just a reminder that this report covers April, May and June. SLT did receive it days after the deadline back in July, and it's just been delayed due to the August break, and it will return formally to Cabinet after governance and audit this morning. The assumption is that you've read the paper, so yeah, just mention a few things. At the end of Q1, there were 15 risks on the register. You're going to find their details in Appendix A, which includes the mitigating actions. Appendix B is the heat map. Key points are Children's Services would like to de-escalate a risk, which is reference CS0091. I'm not going to go through it all due to time. And then we've got under 3.6, as per our risk management framework, any risk that is scored 15 or above must be considered for escalation by SLT. So as you can see there in table 2, we're not proposing to escalate either of the risks, and explanation is given as to why not. The final risk is obviously going to the transformation programme manager for them to consider and go via the transformation board as per the framework that we adhere to.
We're not going to go into 3.7 at the moment because, sorry, apologies. Under 3.7, we are proposing to close PCC 003. We are not going to go into 3.8 yet because that's the closed session. So I'll whiz on straight to the end of the recommendation. So to be formal, just to say it's recommended that the Cabinet notes the current strategic risk register and is satisfied with the progress against the mitigating actions for Q1, approves the de-escalation of CS 0091, the closure of PCC 003, and the escalation of the risk that we're going to cover in a closed session. So that's a very quick whistle-top tour, and apologies for just using codes, but I thought it'd be quicker and on the assumption that you have all read the paper.
Yep. Thank you very much, Beth. Does anyone have any comments or any questions for Beth? Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, it was just me musing again, following on from what Diana and I were talking about on the policies there. And I suppose, Beth, I'm not sure whether the risk that we've got out-of-date policies sort of needs to be really flagged up. It's just that one recently came to my attention, which was the income management and service cost recovery policy, which is actually dated January 2016. And some of the introduction, in fact, the context of it is really badly out of date. I suspect Jane may comment that the underlying principles are still the same. But it just gives an impression after 7 years that it really should be reviewed again, especially with the introduction. But I don't know how many other policies are like that, which could lead to a bigger risk. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. I've made a note of that, Councillor Peat. We definitely don't have that risk on the strategic risk register. Some services might themselves have an individual risk, but I've made a note and we'll look into it for you.
Thanks, Beth.
Jane?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I think it was a risk we identified as a management team across the council. And in response to that, we have now in place a register of all policies with the review dates on that for every review as well. And when those review dates are coming up, notification goes out via email and so on for that as well. But as Councillor Peat's rightly picked up, the income policy, I don't think it had a review date on it. Some of the context wasn't quite up to date, but as we said, the underlying process and requirements against that policy remain active now. But we will look at that and just update it.
Thanks, Jane. And I mean, this might be slightly boring, but I'm going to mention Ian's root cause analysis again. You know, anyway, John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 147 of our pack, and it concerns the escalation of the risk due to Wixis. And it's a residual risk rated at 20. I mean, what have we got appropriate plans in place if this system actually falls to pieces?
I think, if I'm correct, our director Nina is on call. Is Nina still with us?
I'm afraid, but as we've overrun, Nina's had to leave early, so she's not still here, unfortunately.
John, can I suggest that we take an action point on that?
I think so. The note that's been added to the risk register dated the end of July, I think, is very worrying.
Yeah, and we have discussed this system previously, and my recollection is part of the challenge is that it's very far from being in the authorities' control, but it does leave us very, very vulnerable and exposed. So I think if an action point could be logged against that for an update and an answer. Jane?
I was just going to say we'll do that, and perhaps we can circulate a response via email due to the timescales that you set out as well. Yeah,
thanks. Thank you. Anything else for bets on Q1 risk report? No, thank you then, Bets. And
oh, sorry, Lynn, could I just say, but we do have the closed session report. That
yes, I know,
oh,
don't worry.
Oh,
Don't
sorry.
worry. That's what I'm trying to move to. I was going to move us on to agenda item 16, which is the exempt item, and the committee is asked to consider passing the following resolution to exclude members of the public. Connor, do I need to read out the full resolution, or is it okay that it's published?
It is noted on the agenda, but it basically is, it's just to resolve to exclude the public for the following item of business due to it's category 3 of the local authorities access to information variation Wales Audit 2007 because of commercially sensitive information. And if we could just have a propose and second, Chair, please. Okay,
thank you very much. Propose. So John's proposing, and if someone could second that, Councillor Peat is seconding that. Therefore, the resolution is passed. Thank you very much. So we can now move to a private session on